He stood against thousands, and the princess stood by his side. Civilians went about their small tasks because living on the frontier meant learning to act as if danger was routine. Captain Kale Rin stood at the edge of the command deck and watched the city wake. He had the look of someone who had given up on easy sleep. His face kept a map of old scars. They did not bother him, but they did not let him forget. Kale had been a soldier long enough to know the smell of false calm. His unit had come back from the outer rim only days before, their ships patched, and the edges of their uniforms still dusted with foreign ash. New Asterion was meant to be a place of rest. Instead, at dawn, a report came in that a scouting sensor had picked up a cluster of probes moving faster than any known human craft should move. The signal was thin as a thread, but it carried a shape Kale had seen in the reports from the other colonies, the jagged geometry of the Zeathian fleet. He did not rush at first. He listened to the analysts who called it in, to the scientists who argued over noise. Numbers lay across the screens, neat and cold, distance, speed, trajectory. The readings said the probes were small, but they moved like a thought, darting then pausing, probing systems, testing responses. Kale felt the weight in his chest that came when a single wrong move could cost thousands of lives. "Captain," said Lieutenant Myra Sen, her voice steady because that was her job. "We should alert the High Council, evacuate the civilians, pull the fleet together." Standard procedure. Kale did not say no, he did not say yes. He thought of the people of New Asterion, the market sellers who stayed late to barter for fresh supplies, the schoolteachers who kept the history of humanity in soft-voiced lessons, the miners whose hands built the walls of the city. Evacuation meant admitting they could not hold their home. Kale would not grant the enemy that victory without a fight. He found Lyra in the palace gardens. The morning light lay on her like a promise. She stood near a fountain that had not been used for water in months. A maintenance team had not yet fixed the pipes after a minor quake, but she liked sitting by the still marble anyway. There was nothing royal about her hands when she touched the stone, strong, precise. Lyra was the kind of leader who did not rely on the crown to hold her place. She had learned budgets and strategy, had walked the factory lines, and listened when workers told her what they needed. People followed her because she walked beside them. She looked up when he came, and for a moment they simply watched the city together. They did not need the display of gold or protocol. Lyra had come to learn from Kale during the worst years of the war when the Empire needed people who could think and act quickly. She had studied logistics and tactics as if they were languages to master. She had not grown soft in the palace. The rumor was true. She did not sit and wait. "We have a reading," Kale said. He kept his voice low. "Probes, fast, small clusters. It could be a testing pattern. It could be a prelude." Lyra folded her hands. Her face was calm, but her eyes sharpened like a blade. "We cannot run every time we hear thunder," she said. "We must know what it wants." "Knowledge comes from caution," Kale answered. "Evacuations and councils buy time." "Time can be used for more than empty talk," Lyra said. "We can also make time into something that hurts the enemy. We can strike their probes and send a message." He wanted to tell her to stay away from the front. He wanted to remind her that a princess had a role to play that did not involve bullets. But the truth was that Lyra had already stood in battle lines beside him. She was not something to shelter. She had no need to be saved. She needed to stand. "And your plan?" Kale asked. Lyra's lips curled, not a smile, but close. "We do not just hit them, we teach them to be careful. We will use their own speed against them. The probes are fast, but they use a short burst of power. They are excellent at finding gaps. We create a mirror for them and watch them fall into it." Kale felt the familiar tug between what the reports told him and what he believed was possible. He could brief the High Council, present the simulations that showed the risk, or he could trust Lyra and act more quickly. He chose both, to prepare for defense but also to prepare a small strike team that moved like a whisper, not a shout. The team he gathered could fit into a single launch bay. Myra took the comms. Gyro Vance, an engineer with quick fingers and quieter eyes, double-checked their warheads and made jokes about them being the smallest fireworks he had ever made. A small group of volunteers, miners, medics, a retired scout, joined because they believed in being more than numbers on a list. It was remarkable how quickly ordinary people could become extraordinary when the chance demanded it. Their ship was old, with the paint rubbed down by use and time. It hummed with the kind of loyalty only old machines offered. Kale liked the ship. It remembered battles like an old dog remembers familiar hands. When it launched, New Asterion receded into a smear of light. The sensors showed the probes ahead, small points blinking through the vacuum. The first contact was awkward and brief. The probes did not fire as a ship would. They rippled the space around them like something testing the skin of a bubble. Gyro's hands danced over the console as he released the first countermeasures. The probes dodged, then paused, then attacked in a pattern more curious than threatening. Kale watched them like a hunter watches birds. They were fast, but they were designed to dance with sensors, not to fight. Kale's plan was simple in its cruelty. They set a trap that looked like vulnerability. They spread false emissions, planted decoy trails, and burned one engine with a pulse that mimicked the signature of a larger ship. It was a lie dressed in light, and for a moment the probes believed. When the first probe moved close to the bait, it triggered the hidden net. The net did not explode or burn. It reached a cage of magnetic filaments that chewed into the probe's control matrices. The probe flailed, its rapid pulses made small sparks like fireflies caught in a jar. For a brief second, Kale saw something like surprise in the probe's behavior. Then it shut down. The second probe moved in to inspect. Kale's team did not fire directly. They fed another feed into the pattern, making it think the captured probe still transmitted. Curiosity was the probe's weakness, and the team used it. One by one, the probes came to understand the cost of mistake. They were technological thieves designed to steal data and test defenses. They were not built for sacrifice. They carried a single probe back to New Asterion as proof. The city did not celebrate when the team returned. There was a kind of stillness that was not relief but waiting. People needed evidence. The probe sat in the palace hangar like a small carved thing, quiet and useless. That night the High Council summoned Kale and Lyra. There were words like escalation and diplomatic channels and strategic withdrawal. The council favored caution, understandable, given their duty to survive. Lyra did not lean into royal protocol. She presented the captured probe like a simple fact. "They test," she said. "That means they look for weakness. If we are always on the move, we lose the places that make us human. If we never show our face, we are not a people to protect, only targets to flee." There were arguments. Some feared the name of the Zeathians, others called for reinforcements to the outer colonies. Kale kept his voice quiet. He did not name strategies in a council room. He told a story instead, of a miner in Sector 3 who patched a reactor with nothing but a shard of metal and a child's patience. He spoke of small courage. He spoke of people who would not move because their life had meaning in one patch of ground. The council listened. Words are weapons too, when they carry truth. In the days that followed, New Asterion changed in small ways. Market stalls grouped together so they could trade and farm without leaving each other. Engineers worked late into the night, building silent traps and snares, simple things to slow an opponent who had not imagined human cleverness. Children practiced drills that taught not only to hide, but to help each other. The city became a net, strong because it was woven by many hands. Kale and Lyra did not hold parades. They walked the narrow alleys, unannounced, swapping nods with the people. The presence of a leader who did not distance herself from the daily grind had a deeper effect than any speech. When a group of mechanics ran out of parts, Lyra arranged resources in person. When a gardener feared losing a rooftop plot, Kale helped carry soil. These were small acts that collected into a larger thing, a sense that the future was made by people who stayed. Still, the threat did not sleep. The probes were a test, and tests rarely came alone. Their analysis showed patterns. Probes favored certain approaches. They liked to scan open skies and hit comms hubs. If the probes kept coming, the Zeathians were looking for a way to cripple the city's ability to talk and to call for help. Human law and structure relied on communication as much as on steel. Kale planned for that. He organized teams to diversify the city's lines. Runners who could carry messages by foot faster than any signal when necessary, home-built nodes that spoke in odd frequencies the probes did not understand. He taught people to listen for the small changes in their world. People learned to read the city like a body that could be protected. At night, after briefings and checks, Kale sometimes stood outside the palace again. Lyra would appear a few moments later. They did not talk about the council or the plans. They spoke of small things, a street juggler's new trick, the smell of bread from a bakery that had never failed them. Even in the tension, the simple human threads tied them back to life. "People will ask us to be heroes," Lyra said once as they watched the sun turn the distant moons into coins. "They will make our choices bigger than they are." "Heroes are not always the loud ones," Kale replied. "Sometimes they are the ones who stay." Her hand brushed the back of his, not in a claim, but as if testing a fact. They had both seen too much to be romantic about war. There was no promise in the touch, only a quiet agreement that each would stand where the other could not. The scouts returned with news that a larger formation had been sighted beyond the outer belt. It was not many ships, but the pattern of movement matched that of a force preparing to concentrate power. The probes had not been alone in their curiosity. The Zeathians moved like a predator that wanted to understand the rhythm of the herd before the strike. For many in the city, fear settled into the bones like cold. The council debated again. Some wanted to leave. Others wanted to call for alliances from distant human systems. Kale and Lyra stood at the center of the debate like an anchor caught in the tide. They argued not that they could win because of their strength, but because of their willingness to be more than numbers. There was a different kind of power in people who were willing to stay and build defense with their own hands. Then the warning that no one wanted arrived. A wide band of ships entered the tracking radius. Not all were large, some were support vessels, but the formation made a clear path towards New Asterion. The city tightened its belts. People moved to shelters. Lights were dimmed. In the command center, Kale watched the screen and felt a present certainty, the kind that comes when a storm turns from a rumor into rain. "Whatever happens," Lyra said, standing behind him, "we face it together." He could see the strain along her jaw. Being a leader was not ceremonial. It was a constant choice to put duty before self. Kale had seen too many people choose comfort over courage. Lyra did not. She had chosen to bind her fate to the people and to the city she loved. Kale thought of the miners and the teachers, of the market sellers and the medics. He thought of small acts that stitched a city into a community. He thought of the probe they had captured, silent now, a reminder that technology could be broken by thought and not just by force. He tightened his hands into a fist and felt the old logic of soldiers settle into place. Fight not for the glory of victory, but for the faces you will still see when the battle is done. They would be outnumbered, that was certain. The Zeathian fleet could pour numbers like water. But Kale had learned that numbers alone could not capture the shape of human stubbornness. People could hide in plain sight, adapt when the plan failed, reshape their environment with a will that surprised those who thought machines were everything. He believed that the Zeathians measured power differently. They had not yet measured the weight of human hope. They would have little time to prepare. He and Lyra had to turn fear into action and hope into structure. That night, Kale and Lyra called the teams. They did not promise victory. They promised work and presence and plans. They promised that they would stand and not abandon the city because running made people into refugees, while standing made them into something else. Possible survivors, perhaps the beginning of a legend. Outside the palace, the city slept badly. Street lamps blinked and off and on rhythms like nervous hearts. In each window, a different life kept watch. In the quiet before the storm, Kale walked home through alleys that smelled of oil and bread. He paused at a market stall and bought a small loaf he could hardly afford. It was a small comfort. He thought of how small comforts had a way of making people human. When he reached the training yard, he found Lyra waiting by the gate. She held a simple metal box, food packets the palace had arranged to pass out. She looked at him as if to ask if he was ready. "We go now," he said. It was not a question. She nodded. "We stand." The fleet did not wait long. By the second morning, scouts had returned with confirmation. The Zeathians were moving faster than expected. Their numbers were still small, but each ship was a tool of precision, designed to test and exploit the smallest weaknesses in human defenses. The city of New Asterion had time, yes, but it was a thin thread, easily broken. Kale knew that. The council wanted to delay confrontation to wait for reinforcements from other systems. Kale understood the caution, but he also understood the risk of waiting too long. Probes were curiosity, but the ships coming behind them were intent. He gathered his team in the war room. Lyra stood beside him, scanning the tactical map with quiet focus. Mara Sen adjusted the sensors, making the room hum with light from screens and the soft, urgent clicks of control panels. Gyro Vance, as usual, leaned on the console, half joking, half serious. Their path, Kale said, tracing the lines with a finger, is predictable enough to anticipate but unpredictable enough to punish mistakes. Their formation spreads thin, but their wings are fast. If we wait until they reach orbit, we will fight on their terms. Lyra's eyes, clear and alert, followed his movements. Then we fight on ours. We take advantage of terrain, of knowledge, of timing, and we hit before they think we will. Kale nodded. That was the problem with conventional tactics. They were based on fear of loss. Humanity had something the Xiatheans did not understand: initiative. They could strike where least expected, and their small forces could achieve effects far larger than their numbers suggested. But it required careful planning, courage, and precision. The plan began with gathering intelligence. Scouts in smaller craft moved closer to the edge of the approaching fleet, observing patterns and signaling silently. Kale and Lyra watched each transmission as though it were a lesson in a new language. The Xiatheans moved in smooth curves, adjusting speed and vector as though testing a response, not aiming to destroy yet. The humans' first goal was to turn those tests into traps. Kale organized his team into 3 squads. The first would focus on creating decoys, small energy signals that mimicked the presence of human ships. They would draw the Xiatheans into areas where traps could be laid. The second squad would be rapid response, ready to intercept any probe or smaller ship. The third, the largest, would act as the main strike force, using human ingenuity and unpredictable maneuvers to force the enemy to expend energy and make mistakes. The day they set out, the sky above the launch bays was gray and heavy with clouds. Civilian life had slowed, as it always did when the city knew a fight was near. Kale walked through the streets, seeing people hurrying quietly, packing supplies, ensuring that children were safe. Lyra followed, not speaking much, but her presence had weight. Soldiers and civilians alike watched her with respect, not because she was royalty, but because she had proven she could act decisively when required. They reached the launch pads. Ships of various sizes sat ready, humming like restless animals. Kale stepped onto the bridge of the main craft, his hands brushing over the controls. It was an older model, modified for speed and tactical advantage rather than brute force. Gyro moved beside him, adjusting panels and recalibrating energy outputs. Mara coordinated the comms, ensuring that all 3 squads could operate in complete silence if required. When the launch sequence began, New Asterion seemed to shrink beneath them. The city was a cluster of lights and shadows, a network of human lives that depended on every decision Kale and his team made. He did not look back. Focus was not for hesitation, it was for clarity. The first squad deployed their decoys as planned. Tiny vessels, no larger than a shuttle, emitted signals that mimicked the energy signatures of human ships. The Xiatheans' sensors picked them up immediately. The humans could see the subtle twitch of the enemy formation as it adjusted, moving to investigate the apparent threats. It was the first step in a trap that relied not on power, but on patience and understanding of behavior. Kale directed the second squad into position. They would intercept any probe or small scout that approached the decoys. It required careful coordination. Too aggressive and they might reveal the main strike force. Too slow and the enemy might detect the deception. The squad moved in silence, each pilot understanding the stakes. Lyra, overseeing communications and tracking, guided their movements. Her voice, calm but precise, carried instructions that made sense instantly. She had studied strategy as Kale had studied the battlefield, but she added insight he did not always expect. Consideration of civilian behavior, timing based on human routines, and the likelihood that enemy pilots might be cautious or overconfident. She was not merely a leader, she was a partner in the dance of strategy. The first probe took the bait. It approached one of the decoys, scanning carefully. Sensors showed its attention and movement. Kale watched with a careful eye. The trap was set. A magnetic field, invisible but precise, reached out at the right moment. The probe stalled, caught in a controlled field that prevented it from moving further. Its signals flickered and the team recorded the interruption. The Xiatheans reacted quickly. Another ship approached, likely to investigate or assist. Kale waited for the proper window. The second squad moved in, intercepting with speed and care. No shots fired, no unnecessary risk. The probe was disabled, its energy dispersed harmlessly. It was an elegant solution, and Kale felt a small thrill of satisfaction. They were teaching the Xiatheans to respect human skill. But the situation escalated. The larger force was arriving faster than anticipated. Sensors showed multiple ships converging, moving in formation that suggested preparation for an attack on the city itself. Kale turned to Lyra. "They're coordinating," he said. "They will not be fooled twice." Lyra nodded, already adjusting the plan. "Then we force them to act on our terms, lead them into a position where numbers are less useful than decision-making." The third squad moved out, the main strike force. Their ship designs were unusual, modifications from civilian transports and research vessels that had been retooled for speed and unpredictability. Kale led them personally. He did not command from a distance. He knew the importance of presence. Soldiers followed those who led from the front. The first contact with the fleet was tense. Xiathian ships moved like liquid, adjusting continuously. They tested weapons on empty spaces, firing pulses that burned harmlessly through nothing, just to measure responses. Kale's team dodged and maneuvered, relying on experience and instincts honed through years of training. Lyra tracked every movement, calling out vectors and timing for maneuvers that human computers might have calculated too slowly. One moment in particular tested everyone's resolve. A Xiathian craft, larger than expected, appeared on a trajectory toward the decoy area. Sensors suggested it carried weapons capable of serious damage. Kale made a split-second decision. He signaled the strike squad to move in a formation designed to bait the enemy craft, while he and Lyra guided the maneuver. The larger ship pursued, thinking it had found the main human force. The trap worked. The magnetic nets and energy pulses slowed it without direct confrontation. The ship was forced into a path that left it vulnerable to human maneuvers. Kale coordinated attacks on the engines, not to destroy but to disable. Sparks flew across the screen. The enemy vessel shuddered, unable to continue its approach. Every action required focus. Every decision could mean failure or success. Kale felt the familiar weight in his chest, the responsibility for lives, yet he also felt a strange pride. Humans were capable of using thought, skill, and courage in ways machines could not predict. They were small numbers in a galaxy that expected them to flee or surrender, but they were unpredictable. They were alive in a way that no technology could replicate. As the battle continued, Lyra moved from console to console, checking reports, analyzing data, and adjusting the plan. She directed medics who were stationed on backup craft, ready to assist anyone who might be injured. She coordinated with the civilian volunteers in orbit, ensuring that emergency supplies and evacuations could occur if necessary. Her mind was a constant presence on multiple fronts. Kale could see that she carried the weight of responsibility without faltering. The day wore on. Energy shields were tested, engines overheated, and sensors flickered under the strain of constant maneuvers. But every human pilot, every volunteer, every strategist was acting as one. The fleet, though larger in size, could not match the speed and unpredictability of the human team. They underestimated the ability of people to act without expectation of reward, to anticipate and adapt continuously. In one decisive moment, Kale spotted a Xiathian ship attempting to flank the decoys and attack New Asterion directly. He and Lyra coordinated a rapid intercept, cutting across the enemy's path. The smaller, nimble human ships forced the larger enemy vessel into an awkward trajectory, slowing it and exposing it to additional traps. Energy nets immobilized it, and the crew surrendered without a single casualty. The victory was not complete. The Xiathians had learned from their mistakes. Sensors indicated that the main fleet was regrouping, moving faster and more cautiously. But the humans had proven something crucial. They could fight back intelligently, decisively, and without reliance on raw numbers. When the ships returned to New Asterion, the city was tense but not broken. Kale's team was welcomed with cautious relief. Civilians and soldiers alike recognized the effort, even if the council continued to debate strategy. Kale and Lyra did not seek accolades. They walked among the people quietly, checking on minor injuries, distributing food and supplies, and listening to concerns. Lyra's presence remained vital. She had become a symbol not just of leadership, but of courage and wisdom. Children followed her eyes and gestures, learning that standing was not only an action, but a mindset. Adults found in her calm authority a reason to act decisively without panic. And Kale, ever the soldier, found reassurance in her clarity. That evening, as the sun sank behind the jagged mountains surrounding the city, Kale and Lyra stood once more on the palace terrace. "They will return," Kale said. "We have slowed them, but the fleet is still coming." Lyra nodded. "Then we prepare. Not only for their arrival, but for every possible way they might underestimate us. We teach them to respect human cunning, to fear our patience as much as our courage." Kale looked at her, seeing not a princess waiting for rescue, but a partner, equal in understanding, skill, and determination. Together, they represented the human spirit, not invincible, but relentless. And for the first time that day, Kale allowed himself a small smile. They had faced the enemy and turned fear into action. They had faced odds that should have been insurmountable, and they had won in ways that could not be measured by numbers alone. The battle had been small, tactical, but it had demonstrated a truth. Humanity could not be predicted, could not be easily broken, and would never surrender without reason. The fleet had withdrawn for now, but Kale knew that the challenge was only beginning. The real test of courage, strategy, and human spirit lay ahead. And when it came, he and Lyra would stand together, guiding not only soldiers but an entire city that had begun to believe in its own strength. The day of the main attack began with a sky that was neither bright nor dark, a gray sweep over New Asterion that made every shad sharp. The city was ready, though readiness could not erase tension. Every human on the streets, in the factories, and in the command centers felt it, a silent understanding that today would decide more than a skirmish. Kale moved through the war room, his eyes scanning data as if reading the heartbeat of the city. Sensors tracked the Xiathian fleet, now larger and more coordinated than the previous encounters. They had learned, adjusted, and were approaching with careful precision. Lyra stood beside him, hands folded over the edge of the table, her gaze steady. She had spent the night coordinating civilians, setting up secondary defenses, and ensuring medical teams were prepared. Kale noticed the faint fatigue under her eyes, but no hesitation. She was entirely present, entirely focused, as if the weight of the city had been absorbed into her posture rather than her mind. "Their formation is different this time," Mara-sen said, pointing at the display. "They are moving in a wedge with the fastest ships leading and heavier ships on the flanks. They intend to split us, hit multiple points simultaneously." Kale nodded. He had expected nothing less. "We don't just react," he said. "We force them to play by our rules. We use the city, the terrain, the unexpected." Lyra tilted her head slightly, eyes following the data streams. "They are counting on fear. They believe size and firepower are enough. We will teach them otherwise." The human fleet, smaller and less powerful in numbers, prepared for the confrontation. Every ship had been modified for speed, agility, or tactical advantage. Some were civilian transports converted into nimble strike craft. Others were lightly armed research vessels, but they carried clever weapons, magnetic nets, energy pulses, and devices designed to disrupt Xiathian sensors. Kale led the first wave. He did not rely on the largest or most intimidating craft. He relied on the unpredictability of humans. The squad moved out silently, skimming the outer atmosphere, avoiding the main detection paths. Lyra coordinated from the command center, feeding them data, suggesting maneuvers that even the computers had trouble calculating. The first clash came near the outskirts of the city. Xiathian scouts moved in, testing the human line. Kale's forces had set traps, energy pulses ready to disorient and nets to immobilize. The scouts fell into the first net as planned, their small ships twitching uselessly. Myra's voice guided the squad through the maneuver. "Hold position, do not overreact, wait for the next cue." Lyra's presence on the comms was calming but firm. She spoke not as royalty but as a strategist and partner. "Patience is our weapon, they will come where we want them. Let them step into the plan." The city below was quiet, almost holding its breath. Civilians had retreated to shelters, schools and factories turned into temporary command points. Street teams patrolled the alleys, watching for small probes or sabotage attempts. Even the children knew what to do in emergencies. Lights turned off, doors locked, and signals sent to family. The people themselves were part of the defense, a living network that supplemented the ships above. The Xiathians adapted. A flanking force tried to circle the city, likely hoping to catch the human fleet off guard. Kale adjusted immediately. He signaled the secondary squad, a group of nimble, older vessels, to intercept. The ships moved like shadows across the sky, swift and coordinated. The flanking force ran into the traps set by engineers days before. Magnetic nets stretched across expected flight paths, disrupting engines and forcing the Zeathians to slow. Kale's eyes were fixed on the main fleet. The wedge formation approached steadily, moving faster than human ships could naturally travel. Sensors indicated the heavier ships were carrying weapons that could tear through human defenses if not countered. Kale made the split-second decision that would define the battle. He directed the fleet to move in a deceptive formation, appearing smaller and weaker than they were. It was a gamble, but one built on strategy, experience, and understanding human advantage over technology. The first volley arrived, a series of energy pulses that streaked across the sky. They hit near the decoys, designed to appear as vulnerable ships. Human sensors confirmed the enemy had fallen for the ruse. Kale smiled briefly, tension in his shoulders easing for a moment. They were not winning yet, but they were forcing the Zeathians to waste energy and time. The battle escalated quickly. Zeathian pilots adapted, trying to isolate and destroy small groups of human vessels. Kale and his team were ready. Every maneuver was pre-planned, yet flexible. Lyra's voice guided them, adjusting for enemy responses in real time. She suggested counter-maneuvers, exploiting weaknesses she had noticed in their formation patterns, weaknesses the Zeathians had not realized existed. In one tense sequence, Kale noticed a group of heavy ships attempting to breach the human defensive line over the western ridge. Their weapons charged, the potential for devastation immense. He coordinated a pincer movement. The strike squad moved in one direction, while the secondary squad created a false retreat, drawing the enemy ships into a trap. When the Zeathians pursued, magnetic nets and energy pulses immobilized two of their heavy vessels. Sparks flew across sensors, engines stuttering. The remaining ships hesitated. Lyra's calm voice directed the follow-up. "Focus on the edges, don't let them regroup, keep them spread." Gyro Vance, at the controls of his craft, added a touch of ingenuity. He modified a pulse to interfere with enemy communications. Suddenly, the Zeathian coordination faltered. Ships no longer moved in perfect formation. Orders were delayed, signals misread. The human fleet exploited the confusion, striking precisely where the enemy was weakest. On the ground, civilians watched as small explosions lit the sky. Shelter doors opened briefly, faces pressed against windows to see the streaks of light that were part of a much larger battle. Kale knew they could not participate directly, but their hope mattered. Every human life in the city was part of the larger strength. Courage was contagious. Hours passed. The battle became a dance of speed, timing, and clever tactics. The Zeathians launched repeated attacks, but each was met with resistance, adaptation, and precision. Kale's team moved fluidly, never allowing fear to control them. Lyra coordinated reinforcements from nearby ships, directing civilian volunteers to distribute supplies and tend to minor injuries. She moved as if she were everywhere at once, a calm force guiding every action. A decisive moment came when the main wedge of Zeathian ships attempted to push directly into the city's atmosphere. Kale saw the opening they had provided. He directed a rapid maneuver, leading the enemy ships over a canyon where the energy nets had been extended days before. As the Zeathians advanced, their ships were caught in immobilizing fields, engines overloading. Sparks and energy flares erupted across the sky. Ships that were previously threats became trapped, unable to maneuver or fire effectively. Lyra coordinated the follow-up. "Focus fire only on disabled ships. Don't waste energy on the rest. Let them learn caution." The message was clear. Humans did not strike recklessly. They acted with skill, intelligence, and strategy. The Zeathians, despite their superior numbers and technology, were struggling against a force they could not predict. Kale felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for the people he fought beside. Every pilot, engineer, medic, and civilian volunteer contributed to the outcome. They were not a fleet alone. They were an entire city in motion, acting as one organism. Their unity amplified each individual effort, turning small numbers into overwhelming effect. The battle continued into the evening. The Zeathians, realizing that brute force alone would not win, began to withdraw partially. They regrouped beyond the atmosphere, their numbers still large, but their confidence shaken. Kale and Lyra watched the sensors, calculating what the next steps might be. Returning to the city, the human fleet was greeted with cautious celebration. Ships landed, engines cooling and crews exhausted but alive. Civilians emerged from shelters, cheering quietly. There were no parades, no banners, but a quiet acknowledgement that the city had survived a test it was not expected to endure. Kale and Lyra moved among the people. They did not seek praise. Instead, they listened. They ensured that minor injuries were tended, that food was distributed, and that the city's defenses were ready for the next threat. Every act, no matter how small, reinforced the lesson. Humans could withstand far more than the enemy expected. At night, the city lights flickered on cautiously. Streets were quiet but not lifeless. Kale walked with Lyra through the alleys. Children peeked from corners, smiling at the familiar faces of leaders who had stood beside them. Merchants returned to check on supplies. Soldiers cleaned their weapons, readying for future challenges. Lyra stopped at a rooftop garden, a place where the scent of soil and herbs reminded her of life beyond the battlefield. She looked at Kale. "They will return," she said softly, "but we have shown them something. That humans are not predictable, that we act as one, and that we fight not just with strength but with intelligence and courage." Kale nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle again. "We have bought time and, more importantly, hope, but the war is not over. We must prepare for the next strike." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "We will face it together. The city, the people, the fleet, all of us. They may have numbers, but we have unity, and that is something no technology can break." Kale looked out over the city, lights reflecting on the calm streets below. He saw not just buildings, but lives, hopes, and courage. The people had stood through fear and uncertainty. They had faced the enemy and remained human. The night was quiet, but in its silence lay determination. Kale and Lyra knew that more challenges awaited, but they had learned a crucial truth: courage, intelligence, and unity could overcome far greater power. As they returned to the command center, ready to plan the next phase, Kale felt the familiar steadiness in his chest. They had not only defended the city, they had begun to teach the galaxy what humans were capable of. And when the next wave came, they would stand ready, not as soldiers alone, but as the embodiment of a people unwilling to surrender, unwilling to yield, and unwilling to be underestimated. The morning sky over New Asterion was bright with the first light of dawn, but the city felt tense, as though the sun itself held its breath. Kale Rin stood on the palace terrace, watching the horizon. Sensors showed the Xiathian fleet approaching once more. This was no probing party or small scouting group. They had brought their full force. Ships stretched across the sky in formations that could crush human defenses if given the chance. Yet Kale did not feel despair. He felt the weight of responsibility, yes, but also a quiet certainty. Humanity had fought against impossible odds before, and they would fight again. Lyra arrived beside him, her expression calm but resolute. She had spent the night organizing civilians, preparing secondary shelters, ensuring that medical teams were ready for immediate deployment. Her presence was steadying. She did not just give orders, she inspired trust and focus. People followed her not because she was a princess, but because she had proven she could stand where others feared to go. "They've come in full," Kale said, scanning the sensors. "They want to break us. They will try every trick, every tactic, every calculation to force a retreat." Lyra nodded. "Then we give them none of it. We fight where we can, we hold where we must, and we act faster and smarter than they expect. Their numbers mean nothing if we move as one." The human fleet moved into position. Ships of all sizes, modified transports, research vessels, and older strike craft slipped into the defensive formations that Kale had devised. Civilians manned auxiliary systems, moving supplies, tending to small emergencies, and acting as runners to maintain communication across the city. The people of New Asterion were no longer passive observers. They were part of the defense, part of the strength that made numbers irrelevant. Kale led the first wave personally. His ship skimmed the atmosphere, sleek and agile. Mara Sen, at his side, coordinated sensors and communications. Gyro Vance monitored energy systems, ready to improvise at a moment's notice. The team was small in number but vast in skill and resolve. The Xiathians advanced with predictable precision. Their wedge formation moved forward, weapons charged and scanners active. Kale's team moved not to meet them head-on, but to manipulate their perception, to make the enemy believe they were weaker than they were. False signals, decoy energy trails, and mirrored emissions drew the enemy into traps carefully laid in orbit and over the terrain. The first engagement was a test. A Zeathian wing broke formation, aiming directly at a decoy squad. Kale watched as the ship moved into a magnetic trap, its engines stuttering and sparks flying across sensors. The decoy squad avoided direct confrontation, letting the trap work. The enemy vessel was caught, immobilized but unharmed, a warning rather than a destruction. Lyra's voice cut through the tension. "Hold fire, let them learn caution. Every mistake they make is an advantage for us." The Zeathians hesitated. Their formation faltered, ships pausing as if calculating. Kale pressed the advantage. The main strike squad moved swiftly, targeting exposed ships while avoiding unnecessary risk. Every maneuver was precise, every decision measured. They were not merely defending. They were teaching the enemy what human strategy could achieve. The battle escalated. Energy pulses streaked through the sky, nets extended invisibly, and smaller Zeathian craft were drawn into traps over valleys and ridges designed for advantage. The humans' knowledge of their terrain, combined with ingenuity and speed, compensated for the disparity in size and firepower. On the ground, civilians maintained calm under pressure. Streets were mostly empty, but those who remained had been trained for emergencies. Children and families followed established routines, lights off, windows secured, and signals sent to maintain coordination. Kale knew the people themselves were as much part of the defense as any ship in orbit. Their courage and preparation multiplied the effect of every human maneuver. Hours into the battle, the main Zeathian fleet tried a concentrated push toward the city center. They believed their numbers could overwhelm. Kale and Lyra had anticipated this. They guided their fleet into a complex maneuver that forced the enemy to divide, overextending their ships and exposing flanks to precise attacks. Energy nets immobilized key vessels, while human pilots moved in to disable engines with targeted pulses rather than destructive force. Lyra coordinated reinforcements from auxiliary craft and civilians in orbit. Medical teams prepared for immediate response, engineers adjusted shields and energy flows, and every resource was leveraged to support the defensive strategy. She moved as if she were everywhere at once, a steady force guiding countless hands and minds toward a single goal. The turning point came when Kale noticed a Zeathian command vessel attempting to flank the human fleet and strike at the city's communication hubs. He calculated rapidly, weighing speed, risk, and terrain. "We split," he ordered. "Strike Group A engages the flanks. Strike Group B intercepts the command vessel. Timing is everything." The maneuvers were executed flawlessly. The human fleet moved with speed and precision, drawing the Zeathian ships into traps designed to exploit their overconfidence. Magnetic nets and energy pulses immobilized the command vessel, forcing it to halt, while smaller ships moved to disable its engines. The enemy fleet's cohesion collapsed. Ships that had seemed invincible now struggled against human ingenuity and determination. Kale watched the sensors with steady focus. He felt the familiar pressure in his chest, the responsibility for lives, but also a deep pride. Every pilot, engineer, medic, and civilian volunteer contributed to this moment. Humanity had no overwhelming firepower, no massive warships, but they had something the Zeathians had not accounted for: creativity, courage, and unity. Lyra's voice guided them through the final phases. "Concentrate only where we can win. Let the rest hesitate. Every mistake is an opportunity. Keep them divided." The humans' tactics worked. Zeathian ships faltered, some immobilized, others confused by misdirected signals and traps. The enemy attempted to regroup, but the human fleet maintained pressure, using speed and agility to prevent coordination. Every human maneuver was reinforced by another, every decision amplified by training, experience, and courage. The final wave of attacks focused on the largest remaining Zeathian ships. Kale led a coordinated strike, targeting engines and weapons systems with precision pulses. Sparks and flares lit the sky as vessels were forced to surrender or withdraw. The remaining fleet, seeing the effectiveness of human strategy, hesitated and finally retreated. On the ground, the city slowly returned to life, streets filled with cautious movement. Civilians emerged from shelters, cheering quietly. Soldiers and volunteers cleaned weapons and equipment, checking for damage. Engineers repaired shields and systems, ensuring the city could withstand another attack if necessary. Kale and Lyra moved among the people. They did not seek praise. Instead, they listened, ensured minor injuries were treated, and observed that supplies were distributed and order maintained. Every act reinforced the lesson. Humans could survive, adapt, and overcome challenges that seemed impossible. As night fell, the city glowed softly, lights reflecting off streets and rooftops. Kale walked with Lyra to the palace terrace overlooking New Asterion. The sky was quiet now, the threat withdrawn, but the people remained alert, ready for anything. "They will return," Kale said. "But they know now that humanity is not to be underestimated." Lyra nodded. "We have shown them something important. They have strength and technology, but we have unity, intelligence, and courage. That cannot be defeated by numbers alone." Kale looked out over the city, seeing not just buildings, but lives, hopes, and determination. He knew the fight was far from over. But humanity had proven a truth that could not be measured in weapons or ships. They were resilient, creative, and unyielding. The next morning, Kale addressed the city from the central square, standing beside Lyra. Civilians, soldiers, engineers, and volunteers gathered to hear him speak. He did not promise safety, nor did he boast of victory. Instead, he spoke of courage, unity, and preparation. He reminded them that their survival depended not on numbers alone, but on the collective strength of every individual acting together. Lyra joined him, reinforcing the message. She spoke of responsibility, of hope, and of the need to protect not only their homes but the values that made them human. The people listened, inspired not by titles or ranks, but by the knowledge that their leaders had stood beside them in danger and uncertainty and had not wavered. In the following weeks, New Asterion rebuilt. Systems were repaired, supplies replenished, and training continued. The people had learned the value of preparation, the importance of courage, and the power of unity. Kale and Lyra remained at the forefront, guiding the city, leading exercises, and ensuring that every citizen felt a part of the defense. The Zeathian fleet did not return immediately, but their attempts to probe human systems became cautious and measured. News spread across human colonies of New Asterion's resilience, of the people who had stood against overwhelming odds and prevailed through ingenuity, courage, and unity. Kale and Lyra became symbols not only of leadership, but of what humanity could achieve when it acted as one. At the edge of the city, Kale and Lyra stood quietly, watching the horizon. The sun reflected on the walls of New Asterion, casting long shadows. The city had survived not because of machines or weapons alone, but because of people who refused to surrender. They had proven that humans, even against overwhelming odds, could stand strong and defend what they loved. "We have done more than survive," Lyra said softly. "We have shown the galaxy what humans are capable of." Kale nodded, feeling the steady certainty that comes from hard-fought experience. "And we will continue to show them. As long as we stand, as long as we fight together, humanity cannot be underestimated." The city was quiet now, but alive. The people had learned to face fear with courage, danger with ingenuity, and overwhelming odds with unity. Kale and Lyra knew that more challenges would come, but they also knew that humanity had discovered a power greater than any weapon. The power to stand, together, unbroken and unyielding. As night settled over New Asterion, the stars above seemed closer, reflecting the resilience and hope of those who had fought to protect their home. Kale and Lyra remained side by side, ready for whatever would come, knowing that the future was theirs to defend, not through fear, but through courage, unity, and the enduring human spirit. The galaxy had been warned. Humanity would stand. He stood against thousands, and the princess stood by his side,